Welcome back. So at this stage of the training, you should have your textures fully refined with any remaining issues resolved and baked into the final files. In this next video, we're going to be converting the Modo shading into game engine compatible textures. Like I'd mentioned early on, the original asset was created by someone without knowledge of game asset texturing. So we're going to have to do some manual texture work in an image editor in order to convert our asset into the final export. I'm personally using Photoshop, but nothing I'm doing is all that intense, so you should be capable of following along using any image editor. Now the way I like to work, I'll just be modifying the original files, so it would probably be wise to back up the baked images folder, especially if you want to follow along on both the Unity and the Unreal asset preparation paths. Either way, it's a good idea to have the originals to refer to should something go wrong. Now in this particular video, I'm going to be preparing the asset for Unity Game Engine, and specifically I'm using Unity 5.3.5 if that makes any difference. So the first order of business is we're going to open up our file and do a little bit of housekeeping. So you're going to want to open up the asset you've created if you've been following along, or if you're just jumping in here and you want to open mine, we're going to file open, and you're going to want to open the texture baking complete file. This has everything in it. This is where all the textures are applied inside of here. Alright, so we still have that high-res alien that we were using for baking, and that's no longer necessary for this. So this file is going to be a lot faster if we just remove that. So I'm just going to select this here, select all of these pieces, and then just hit delete. That also means we can get rid of the shader tree layers that relate to this guy. So I'm going to select and highlight that and delete. And then I'm going to remove the images related to that. So we should be able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Select those top 10 images and hit delete on those now. So now just to make sure we don't affect anything, I'm going to save as. I'm going to go in here to source files. I'm going to create a video 10 folder. We're going to call this one Unity. And this one I'm going to call Prep Export Unity. Alright, and then the next thing I'm going to want to do, I'm going to take all of these various layers. I'm just going to merge these now all into a single layer. It's not necessary to have these separated anymore, so I'm going to right click on the item list and select merge, click OK. We're just going to call that low res alien. Alright, we're going to want to go in here, and we have that morph map. So I'm actually going to go to vertex map, and I'm going to apply that base position at 100%. So now we can take that guy and delete that vertex map. I think we can delete out any of these extraneous vertex maps as well. Just right clicking on those and selecting delete. Alright, the next thing we want to do is we want to duplicate over those mirrored objects that we didn't have duplicated before. I'm just going to select the polygons by double clicking on them. And then I'm going to hit my Alt W to set my origin as my action center, and then Shift V, click in the viewport, clone those over, do the same thing to the hand, and then we have this breathing tube here in the back as well. Shift V and click. Alright, Control S to save that guy. So you'll probably find the scene file is a lot easier to deal with now that we've cleared out all that extraneous information that's no longer necessary. So let's jump in to our shader tree and start doing what we need to do here. You know, while we're here, I can probably delete out these unnecessary render outputs. And I'm going to go so far as to remove all of these bake items as well. Just selecting all of those and hit delete. All right. So let's jump in here to our bake armor and see what we need to do first. So the first thing you need to do to prep any asset for Unity is to add the Unity shader into your object. So that can be found in Add Layers, Custom Materials, and then Unity Material. So I think it's going to be a little bit easier moving forward here if we jump into our Advanced viewport. And since I already have that set up in the games layout, I'm just going to use my Control Tab switcher here. We're going to jump over here to our Games Tools. I can minimize this side over here so we can get a better view of our character. Switch into our shader tree. So the Unity material works the same way as the other shader tree layers, where its position in the layer stack is important. So I'm going to move that to the bottom here. And if we inspect our Unity material, we can see the shading properties that affect it. So we have an albedo, the metallic, smoothness, normal scale, detail scale. These are all the various effects. So these are all matching the shading outputs that you would also have in Unity. So we're going to mostly be focusing on albedo, metallic, and smoothness. And then we'll have a normal map and an ambient occlusion as well that we'll be applying in here. So if I disable these guys here, I'm going to first apply the normal here. And I'm going to right click on the normal. And then we're going to go down here to Unity. And this is off the screen for you, but you should be able to right click on the Unity. And then you get all of the various Unity shading options. So this one is the normal map, so we're going to want to go to Unity Normal. And like before with our normal map, we get this option pop up here. And unfortunately, I realized there is an issue with the baking wizard, where the baking wizard is actually applying the color management. So you're going to want to click No here on the normal, otherwise it's going to cause issues for you. We'll turn that back on. So you can see in the image still that it has the default color space in there, and if we switch that to none like you're supposed to, you don't get the proper normal map like you should. But I'm going to show you a quick way that we can fix that. So I'm going to switch into Photoshop, double click on my desktop to open up the normal map. So the way I would go about fixing that is adding an exposure layer, and then I want to eliminate any of the gamma that's been added here. So I'm going to add 0.4545 to that layer. And there's also a plugin that I like to use that fills in all these extra spaces. You can get this from the Flaming Pear website for free. It's called Solidify, and what it does is it fills out all of your edges so you don't end up with any seam issues should you have to resize any of your textures later on. So that once you've installed that, that'll appear. Make sure you select your correct layer. You're going to go to Filter, and we're going to go to Flaming Pear, and then I'm going to go to the Solidify. So you see here what this has done is it's filled out all of those other spaces, and this is just a great way to just minimize any possibilities of having any seams in your textures. So I have the exposure on there, and I can flatten that image so that we don't have the alpha channel present anymore. And then I can just hit File, Save. Alright, so with that save, we can jump back into Modo, and it automatically pops up here and asks, and you can see now with the color space set to none, now we're getting the proper result from our normal map. So this has been reported as an issue, and hopefully by the time you've received this, it's already been fixed. If not, this is just a quick little step workaround to resolve that issue. Okay, so we got the normal map prepared for our object. So now the next map is going to be the diffuse color. In Unity, the diffuse color is known as the albedo. So I'm just going to enable my diffuse color, and then I'm going to right click on there for that effect, and I'm going to go to Unity and then select Unity albedo. So the albedo is very similar to the diffuse of a surface. It's just a different nomenclature that they're using for that. So we'll probably need to make some adjustments to this later on, but for right now I'm just going to use that straight up as it is. Now what we have left is the specular and the roughness, which don't map to anything exactly in Unity. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into Photoshop, and I can close my normal map, and then I'm going to open the specular amount and the roughness amount for the armor. And since these are grayscale images, I'm actually going to image mode grayscale. That'll make the file smaller. And then I'm going to use my solidify. Alright, so the specular amount, since there's no specular specifically in Unity's game engine, what I want to do is I want to convert this into a metalness. And metalness is really just an on-off. It's a solid white for something that's metal, and everything else that's non-metal should just be black. So what I'm going to do I'm going to use a curves adjustment layer on here. So I'm just going to select the white point automatically and just click on where I want my metal to be, so that'll force that to be all white. Then select my black point, and then I'm going to click where I want that to be black, and that'll just be everything that's going to be black. And of course you have some shades of gray in here, so I can kind of sharpen that up a little bit. Can't get rid of it all without doing a new render, but I think that should be good enough. Maybe my screws. So if I sample that, the color isn't quite white. So I'm going to add another layer on top of here, and I'm going to use the bucket fill. Maybe give this a tolerance of 32 and anti-alias that. And then sample all layers. So we're just going to go through here. Hit D for the default colors, X to swap. Alright, so let's just click on all of these little screws here. Like I said, there's going to be a little bit of manual work to do all of this, but it's really nothing that's all that intense. Just takes a second to go through and turn all of these to white. So it's okay to have shades of gray in between where things are gradiating from one surface to another, but really things that are fully metal, you want to make them be this solid white color. Okay, so for our purposes, I think that looks good. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and just so we don't get confused, I'm going to save this out as metallic. We'll click Save there. Now we're going to jump back into Modo. Just click No on that. So we're going to add a new image map, Load Image, and we're going to load that metallic texture we just created. So Armor Metal. Okay, so once we've added in the texture, we need to right click on our effect, Unity, and set that to Unity Metallic. Now you can see that it's rendering these out as metallic, but our underlying color from the albedo is a little bit too dark. So what I did to fix that problem, jump back into Photoshop, is if I open up the diffuse color of the armor, in this particular case, I'm going to use my solidify again. Flatten that image down. Now I'm just going to Control All to copy, and I'm just going to paste. Alright, now we're in business. So I'm going to add this layer over the top. So now it's going to force all of those metallic places to be white, and I don't want them to be a solid white. So I'm actually going to key this back a little bit, about 75%. And I also need to delete this out here around that. So get my magic wand, get the correct layer, select that. Alright, so that's the diffuse color. So if we flatten that image and we Control S to save. Alright, now we switch back into Modo. It'll ask if we want to update that image. And now you can see you're being able to see the scratches, you're being able to see that metal on there. And the reason it looks a little bit dull is because the Unity material, this smoothness setting, if we were to crank that all the way up to smooth, you can see now it's looking like really shiny metal. So the next option we're going to change is the smoothness setting. Now smoothness is a little bit like Modo's roughness, where the image specifies which areas are very smooth, very glossy, where roughness is at 0, smoothness is at 100% for the equal. So I think we should be able to invert our roughness map and then make some adjustments to it and get pretty close to what they're looking for in Unity for smoothness. So if I go to the roughness map here and I Control I to invert that in Photoshop, so I think we got the same case here. We want the metal to be fairly shiny, and then the background part is going to be kind of rough. So I think if I take this layer here from the metalness, paste that into this layer, and then again add that. And then I'm going to pull that back a little bit. That'll hopefully get us what we're looking for in the roughness department. So we can either flatten it and just hit save, or we can go to save as in Photoshop and select that as a PNG. And we're going to go to the roughness channel there and overwrite that. Alright, so we'll jump back into Modo now. Going to load that roughness on there. So let's enable that layer and then right click and then Unity, and we want to change that to smoothness. So we can see what effect that is having on there. I think that's still a little too rough for the body portion of there. So that's one of the things to keep in mind, is you're going to be doing a lot of this kind of just by eye. So the advanced viewport is able to show you what it will look like in Unity, so you can really use this to sort of fine-tune your textures. So we're going to jump back into Photoshop here, and I'm going to go underneath here and add in a curve layer. Maybe I want to darken this up some. Let's give that a try. PNG, armor roughness. Jump back into Modo. Update the texture. Oh, that's looking better. Getting some nice variation on there. So I think I want to add in the ambient occlusion that we created. So I jump back into Photoshop here. Minimize these guys really quick. And then I'm going to open up this ambient occlusion. Now you can see it has this black outline on the outside of that. And I personally don't like that. So what you can do is I can take the select, and then we can select by color range, and then just select this black background color here in Photoshop, and that'll select all of just that solid black. And I can hit Control-Shift-I to invert, Control-Shift-J to float that. So now that's a floating selection. I can go here to my solidify, flatten that image, and I'm just going to save that out. Jump back into Modo, and then we're going to add a layer here. We're going to do new image, so load image. We're going to load in that armor ambient occlusion. We're going to right click on that and say Unity ambient occlusion. You can see that puts a nice little sort of, just adds some little darkness into those crevices there. Just give it a little bit more of a nicer look. And then we have some metallic issue that's going on here. So if I look back at my map in Photoshop, this selection here that I did on that, I can create a new layer and default to get the default colors. I fill that black. Now control click in Photoshop to create a layer underneath, and then control backspace, control E to merge those, control A to select all, control X to cut. So let's go to the metallic. And then in here we're going to paste that guy, and then we're going to multiply on that because that middle medallion there isn't metal. So we're going to flatten that. Control S to save. We're going to jump back into Modo. That'll have been updated. I think that looks better there. So we can delete this spec amount here. So now we have a normal map, our Unity albedo, the Unity smoothness, which is pulled from the roughness layer. We have the metallic, which specifies which areas are metal. And then we have our ambient occlusion layer. So for each one of these, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 texture layers. You know what I'm thinking? That if I recall the rendered image of this guy, this sort of diffuse or the albedo color texture here, it feels like it was darker in the original. So we can jump back into Photoshop here. And I'm going to darken up that area. So we'll add a curves layer in here. Now we can use this little adjustment handle, and if I click right there, we can lock that particular color so it doesn't change. I just want to really sort of darken up the rest of this area here. And then I also don't want to affect these orange colors. So if I get a wand selection here and select that, and also select in there, and actually just turn off the contiguous. Control D to deselect, select all of that. Now I can go here, create a mask, and then invert that mask. So you can see now that it's not affecting the orange color. So let's flatten that guy out and save it again. Alright, jump back into Modo. Update that texture. Oh yeah, that's much better. I really like that look right there. I think that's matching what we had in the render very well. Alright, so now we have tackled the body armor. Let's try this a couple more times before I turn you loose to try it on your own. So let's go into the flight suit. Just like before, we're going to disable these layers. We need to add in the layer, and we're going to add in custom material, Unity material. So we'll need to do this for each material in our object. Take the suit normal. And then I'm going to right click on the effect to make sure I have that set up as Unity normal. And I actually want to click ES on that. So here's the error that I'm talking about. It's very obvious to see this here. So if you're seeing that sort of effect, we'll be going into Photoshop and fixing that normal. So I'm just going to close all of these Photoshop layers now. No. All right, now let's concentrate on the bodysuit. So I'm going to use my solidify, and we're going to flatten this. Get an exposure here, 0.4545. Flatten that. Then we can hit Control Save. And like I said, this has been reported as an issue, so hopefully by the time you're seeing this, this will no longer be a problem. Alright, jump back into Modo. Update that texture. See, that fixes that problem right up. Now we're going to turn on the Diffuse Color, set that up as Unity Albedo. And then we want to create that metallic. So we're going to jump back into Photoshop. Can close the normal. And I'm going to open up the roughness and the specular amounts. And I'm going to use my solidifies to fill in those outer areas on both of these. Also going to convert those to grayscale. So I might forget on a couple of these, but anytime you have a texture that's like roughness, it's only a single channel. You can save some space on your disk and also loading times just by converting these to grayscale. So image mode grayscale on those. So now on this suit, since he's an alien, they have some sort of a weird hybrid technology. So they're using a flexible metal. So this is really kind of metal, but it's not 100% metal. It's kind of like a hybrid. So what I was planning to do with the shading on this is just kind of create a quasi-metal map on this. So like I said, shading in between black and white is okay. So we want to make sure that things that are obviously metal, like his belt buckles here, definitely render out. And then stuff like these straps definitely aren't. So we'll put a black there. And then I just kind of create a gentle sort of S between those two. So that should hopefully give us the quasi sort of metallic nature that I'm after. So I'll file, save as. So this is going to be the Stute metallic. And we're going to save that as a PNG. Okay, and save that. All right, jump back over into Modo. Update that. So we want to image map, load image, and we're going to load up the metallic image we just created. Right click on there, Unity, metallic. So I think that's producing an interesting look for us, but the underlying diffuse color is just much too light, I think. So maybe if we jump back in here and we open up the diffuse color on the bodysuit. Solidify. You know, if you're doing this a lot, it'd probably just be easier to create an action, and then you can just map it to a key for the solidify, so you can just apply that in just a single stroke. Flatten that guy. Now let's apply a curve in here, a curve adjustment layer. So you can see here from the histogram, this is where most of these colors are happening, and I really want to lighten up. So maybe we'll just get rid of these altogether, and I'll use my adjustment. Kind of want to keep the detail area sort of dark on there. Anything where it hits the top or the bottom is where it's going to be clipping. I'm not really a big fan of clipping things out, so I just adjust it a little bit so that we get some smoother gradations in there. So let's try flattening that guy out and saving it and see what result that gets us. Jump into Modo, update that. Oh, that's much better. I think that is pretty close to what I'm looking for. Might actually even darken it up a little bit so we can undo. And I can sort of undo that, maybe 75%. Flatten again. Control save. Update that texture. Jump back into Modo. And sometimes if the texture doesn't update, you can right click on there and you just reload the image. Alright, I think that kind of gets us that hybrid look I'm going for. So we were going to delete that out, delete out the roughness. I'm going to go back. Now we need to make the smoothness map. So that was from taking this and inverting that. I think we want to be fairly shiny, so I'm just going to increase this quite a bit. And we definitely want to make sure that these belts stay completely flat. So let's try that. File, save as. Maybe this time I'm going to call this smoothness. Just so I don't go crazy. I'm trying to remember what image was used for what effect. Alright, so jump back into Modo here. Add image. So we're going to load image. And we want the smoothness we just created. Right click on there, Unity, and smoothness. Oh yeah, right away. I think that we just hit it just right on the mark. Alright, and now I'm going to do that ambient occlusion, so we jump back into Photoshop. We're going to open up the ambient occlusion that we've created. And like I said, I don't like this black background, so I actually just made an action here that should get rid of that entirely. So I just recorded the sequence of events that I showed you last time. And so I just call it remove black background from Ambient Occlusion, and I can just click that. And it automatically selects that background color, floats the selection, and then fills it in with the Flexify. So I can hit Control S on that. So anytime you do something that's repetitive multiple times, it's great in Photoshop that you can just create these little actions, and then you can just apply those to keys, or just keep them in here in your actions folder and just click on them. So you can just do these actions over and over again really easily, so you're not manually going through and doing these steps every single time. So jump back into Modo here, and we're going to add an image layer here. Image map, load image. Let's open up that ambient occlusion we just made. Unity, ambient occlusion. Yeah, it's just a subtle little effect, but it kind of pops out some of those details really nicely, and I like that. All right. So there we are on the flight suit, and we want to hit Control S to make sure we save our asset. So we're almost at the 40-minute mark now, so I think we're going to just stop here for this video, and then in the next video we will pick up where we left off here and continuing this process. Hey there, welcome back. So now that we've finished baking out all of our textures, the next step is to take those images and convert those into a format that we can use to export then into Unreal Editor. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to be processing those images into PBR type materials using an image editor. And I'm specifically going to be using Photoshop. You're welcome to use any editor that you'd like to use. What I'm going to be doing isn't all that difficult, so it shouldn't be problematic for you to use in just about any other image editor. So first, let's open up our scene file. So you're going to want to open the scene file you've been working on, or if you're just jumping in here with me, then you're going to want to open the baked complete. So let's open that up. So texture baking complete in the Unreal 4 folder. So let us open that up. Just take a few seconds here for Modo to do its stuff and get that all displayed in our viewport. All right, there's our file as we saved it out from the end of the last video. So as before, we want to save this guy into a new location. So we're going to go here, create a video 10. Unreal 4, so video 10 Unreal 4. And I'm going to call this file lookdev. Now, since we're going to be editing those images, I think it's always a good idea to back up the images that you've baked. I mean, you could always go back and rebake them if you want, but for me, it's just easier to make duplicates of those real quick. So I've just opened up the folder where those source files are. So I'm just going to take my baked textures and copy that, and then we're just going to paste that into the same folder. So imagine, regardless of the platform you're on, there should be an easy mechanism in order to just clone a folder like that. So you can see we just have the same images in there. So then we can just go in and we can just overwrite these textures. And by doing that, Modo will just automatically re-import them. Makes things a little bit easier for us. So I can close that. Now another little bit of housekeeping thing that we can do next, it'll just make this file move a lot easier. Now that we're done with the baking, there's really no reason to have the high resolution character anymore. So I just hit escape a few times just to make sure nothing's selected. Then I can select that and hit the delete key. And that should remove him from the scene. Then we're going to go through in the shader tree, select the shading layers and delete those as well. And we don't need any of these render outputs or any of the bake items any longer. So I'll delete those as well. And then in the images, I'm going to delete any of the images that were assigned to him. So I selected those images there and hit delete there. So now we can hit save again for our file. That should make things move along a lot quicker without having all the overhead of that other geometry inside of the scene. I think the next thing we can do is we can clone over those other surfaces where we only had one for the purposes of baking. So I can go in here and I can go to the air tubes, and we want to select those air tubes there, and I'm going to set my Alt W to my origin action center, and then Shift V to get my mirror tool, and then just click anywhere in the viewport, and that will clone that over. And then I think we had in the armor, we have this bit here needs to get cloned. So Shift V, clone him over. And then we'll also do that to the gloves. Shift V. And then we need to go to the boots. So Shift V on the boots. And then we can also go into the body armor here. We're going to go to the vertex map, and we're going to merge those pieces back into the correct position. So I'm going to go here to the apply morph, and we're going to take that base position morph and apply that. You see it pops those guys back into position. And we get the air tubes, do the exact same thing. Vertex map, apply morph. And I believe those were the only two items that had any morphs on them for baking. So that's really all we need to do there. So I'm going to go File, Save again. Alright, now we're really ready now to do the next portion of the training. So we're going to be doing that, mostly working in the shader tree from here on out. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to turn off each of the layers in the shader tree here, and then we're going to slowly sort of systematically go through and replace them one by one. So the first thing we need to add in order to make this a true Unreal material is add the Unreal material item. So we go into the Add Custom Materials, and then we go to this Unreal material, click that. And this being the shader tree, you're going to want this to be underneath your image map. So I'm going to drag this to the bottom layer here. And then of course the next layer we want to move is that normal, and we'll enable that. So we already know that that's already all set up properly, so that gets us our normal map. Now I'm going to take the diffuse color that we baked out, and this should represent mostly the same thing as the base color. So what you do is you go into the effect column and you right click on there, and you want to go to these Unreal materials, and you can't see them all off screen, but we have many of the similar ones as what you have in Modo. So we have the base color one here, and that should mostly represent the diffuse color. So we assign that guy into there, and then we also baked out this specular and this roughness amount. So if we look in the Unreal material itself, we can actually see specifically what it supports. So we got a base color here, metallic, specular, roughness. Emissive color would be like luminosity, and then opacity is just the transparency of it. And then reflection rays is just for Modo rendering purposes. So we should be able to translate these layers that we've baked out in order to turn this into a true Unreal material. So I think one of the first things we're going to tackle is we have numerous metal parts on here that were baked into the material maps. Now what we want to do is call those out as being metallic. And the way you need to do that for Unreal is to make a metalness or a metallic texture map. So I think we can make one fairly easily using the specular channel. So I'm going to open up Photoshop, my editor, and then I'm going to open those textures for there. So we have the roughness, and the specular amount. And I should point out that before this video I actually went through and I converted all of the non-RGB images into grayscale, just so it saves a little bit of space on disk. So if you'd baked these out yourself and you're noticing that they were RGB, since the information in them is only shades of gray, I converted them all to grayscale images. So one of the first things I always like to do when you have baked textures like this that have these open spaces is I like to fill that in using a tool called Solidify. So if you go to a website called flamingpear.com, and I'll put that URL up on the screen here so that you can see that, you can download these freebie plugins, and I find a few of them are really indispensable. And in this case, the one I like to use is one called Flaming Pear, and it's called Solidify. And what that does is it goes through and it fills out the rest of the image. So if you were to scale these down to a different resolution, sometimes there's possibilities that there's pixels over the edge that start to show up, and by using something like Solidify, that eliminates that problem. So if you need to rescale the image, Solidify really eliminates any problems that might show up around the seam areas of your images. So I'm going to apply Solidify to these two guys. Okay, so the map that we're trying to make here now is a metalness or a metallic map, and what the metallic map represents is things that are made out of metal. And that's really just sort of an on or off. It's either made of metal or it's not. So we have fairly close look already in the specular channel, so I think we can use some curves on here. So if I set my white point and I click there, that'll set these bands, because these represent the chrome-plated pieces around the glass dome, and then the little clasps that hold the pieces together for the armor. And then we also want to set the rest of this as being non-metal, so I will set a black point onto there. And these scratches were actually metal in there. And then maybe this piece isn't metal, so we could maybe close that down a little bit. And then one other thing I'm going to do is I see that these screws here aren't turning white all the way, so they must have had a lower specular value. So I can just fill those in very quickly using the paint bucket tool here. So I just have a new layer that I've created, and I'm just going to go through here and set D for default, and then X will swap the foreground and background colors on there. And then I can just start clicking on these and filling these guys in with white. Then we have one here. Few around here. So really the only time you would have gray shades in a metalness map is when you're transitioning from one surface that's metal to another. But I think for our purposes, for some of these other areas where it's a little bit gray, it kind of makes it look a little dusty or dirty and worn. So I'm actually okay with that. So I think that looks good for our metalness map. So I'm going to go here and File and save that as. And so I don't go nuts, I'm going to give it a correct name here, so save that out as a PNG, and then I'm going to call this the metallic map. So that will just automatically save a flattened version of that we can then place into the shader tree. Alright, so we go over here and we made changes, but I'm not going to update that just yet. So what I want to do is add in a layer, and we're going to go to load image here, and we want to load in that metallic map that I just created. And then we're going to right click on there and go Unreal Metallic. So that's starting to make those pieces look metal there, but the problem is I think now the underlying color is just too dark. So the diffuse color is affecting those and not making them look very metallic. So the way we are going to fix that is jump back into Photoshop. We're going to open up the diffuse color channel of that. And we are going to solidify that guy as well. We're going to flatten the image just because we don't need the transparency in there. Now we're going to take this specular map and I'm going to clone these real quick. So just drag all of those and then Control E to merge all of those, and then Control X to copy all of those guys out. Control V to post that over, and I think I'm just going to do a screen on that. So that'll lighten up all of those metal pieces now. And it seems to also be affecting this section right here. So I think we want to delete that out. So I'm going to get my magic wand, select that area, and then delete that out of there. Now we can go through and save that as PNG. And we'll just keep the same name. It's a diffuse color image, so we'll just replace that. Click OK and let it save. Alright, now we jump back over to Modo, and we see now it's telling us to update that. And that looks a lot better there. So now I think, if we're looking at here, is that roughness now. Yeah, so if we reduce the roughness there, so a roughness of 0 makes things very shiny. I think we also have metallic here that is affecting this sort of gemstone in his medallion there. So I think we can get a selection on this again, create a new layer. I'm going to fill that black, hit Control, new layer, and that's going to create us a new layer, and then Alt the backspace. Then I can select this. I did not want that there, so delete. Select those two layers, Control E to merge, and then Control A to select all, X, V into this guy over here. And then for this, we're going to want to multiply that layer because we didn't want that to be metal. We actually do want this to be metal. So if I take that bucket guy here, that's way too much. So let's turn our tolerance way down. Let's turn it to something like 3. I think that is probably acceptable, albeit a little bit messy. How about we do it on a new layer? We can erase some of it if we don't like it. Alright, so we're going to save this out again as our metal map. So Control Alt, Control Shift, save. Save that as a PNG. It's going to be the metallic map. So save that. Alright, so if we jump back into Modo now, and we update that metallic map there. That's gone darker around there. What's going on there? Of course, now that we've made changes over here, so we need to clone these layers again. Control E, Control A, X, delete that, get back over here, screen that again. So you'll find out that look dev like this is really just about iteration. You're going to be making a bunch of subtle little changes like this and just solving problems. This is really standard sort of stuff. So I'm going to go through here and save this guy again. PNG, diff color, save that. Jump back into Modo. Update that. Alright, that looks good now. So now we try the specular amount. We can go into Unreal and just see if this corresponds well. Kind of really reduces the specular amount on there. If we invert it, it looks pretty good. So maybe that is what we'll do. Is I'll take that specular amount. Maybe I'll duplicate this. This one we will revert. Filter solidify. And then image mode or image adjustment and invert. So looking at this, I'm thinking, do I really want the specular on here to be reduced on those bands? I guess we can save that out and see what it looks like. Save that as PNG. Armor spec amount. It's deciding it's a copy since we cloned it. Save that. Alright, jump back into Modo here. So there we go. Now it's looks pretty good. So I think I am okay with that for the Unreal. Now we need to take this roughness, Unreal, and we're going to set that to Unreal Roughness. See if that gives us what we want. That is actually not too bad as it is. And then I also want to bring in our image map. So let's load image, and we're going to go into the body armor, and we're going to bring in that Ambient Occlusion image. And this one we're going to set to Unreal Ambient Occlusion. And I like adding the Ambient Occlusion layer just because it kind of pops out those details a little bit, darkens up those little recesses. I think it really is just sort of that finishing touch on there that just makes it look very professional. So I think in terms of look dev for the armor, that looks pretty good. So let's jump in and see if we can't do the same thing with the flight suit. So I will disable these layers here. We will add in our Unreal material. We'll do the same thing here with the Diffuse Color, Unreal Base Color, and then we'll take that Unreal Normal map and move that down here. So I think what we were going for on the flight suit is it has some sort of a hybrid sort of alien technology that's a flexible metal that we're trying to kind of create a metallic look to his bodysuit here. So let's see if we can't make something like that. So let's see if we can't make something like that. So we'll jump into Photoshop here. And I'm going to open up the Diffuse Color, the Roughness, and the Specular. And I'm going to run my Solidify, so filter on that, Control F, and Control F. So I think first I'm going to try and turn this specular amount into the metalness. So we'll put a curve on here. I'll increase that. And I really want these things to not be metal at all, so I'm going to bring that down. Curve that a little bit. And then we're going to save this guy out as a PNG. Metallic. Okay. Alright, we'll jump back into Modo here. We haven't really updated anything yet, so I'll just dismiss that. So we'll go and load image, and we will add in that metallic map we just generated. So Unreal Metallic. And I think again we're going to have a problem with the underlying diffuse color being too dark. I also want to adjust specular up maybe, and then we'll put the roughness down. So let's do the same thing we did before, where we're going to take that specular and I'm going to clone those, merge them together with Control E, select all, Control A, copy to clipboard, remove that unnecessary layer now, and we're going to go to the diffuse color and we're going to set that to screen. I don't want it to be quite that strong, so I think if we just get a little bit of lightening in there, maybe around 50%, we'll save that as a PNG. That's the diffuse color, so we'll just overwrite what's there. It's really such a silly thing, but it's kind of one of my favorite workflow features of Modo, is the fact that you don't have to do anything back in Modo once you've saved out these images. It's really nice how it just knows that an image has changed, and then it automatically offers to update that for you in the viewport. So it can be a big time saver when you're doing constant iteration like this, just trying to get a specific look. Jump back into Modo. Yes, we want to update that. So I think that's more along the lines of what we want. So we have our base color, Unreal Metallic. So let's try this as Unreal Specular. So yeah, we get a lot more metal on there. So if we get to an angle that has a lot of reflection on that, I think it actually looks pretty good. What if we enable the Unreal Roughness? I think we're too rough on there. So let's go in and adjust that some more in Photoshop. So we'll take our roughness. And it seems as though, from my experience, that a lot of the roughness kind of happens in like the first 25% of the image. So I'm going to put a curve on here and kind of bring down those light areas to about there. And then I think I'm going to darken that up a little bit and then bring those up. Because I actually want it to be a little bit glossy, but I definitely want these belts here to look like they're made out of some sort of a very flat fabric. So let's try and see what that looks like. Save that as a PNG. Flight suit roughness, so yep, overwrite that one. Click OK. Jump back into Modo. That updates there. I think that's better, although I'm not getting the glossiness. That because of the specular there. So I think we're getting an inversion on the specular onto that one. So I think that's what we will do. So we will jump back into Photoshop And I'm going to clone this, duplicate. We're going to take the original and revert that back to the specular. Control F to solidify. And then invert that. Control I. So maybe now, so yeah, these black panel things are getting a lot of specular. That's 100% when we invert that. Maybe I'll bring that down just a touch. And we'll flatten that, and we'll save that guy out. Specular amount. Hey, look at that. So it looks flat. We got some nice shiny buckles on there for the belt. So I think that's looking pretty good right now. So we got the flight suit going. We've got the armor. So I think let's take a look at the head and then doing the glass dome. So I'm not going to make you sit through watching me do all of these. That would take a couple of hours. So let's jump in here and do the same look dev now on the head. So I'm going to add in my Unreal material. Drag it into the list. We're going to change our diffuse color here to Unreal base color. We're going to get our Unreal normal map. Now I think if we take a look at these maps in Photoshop, just going to close all of these now. Not going to save them, although I will likely regret that later. I'm going to open up those head images for the specular and the roughness. So you see those had flat amounts on top of those. So I think for specular we don't even need to worry about that. But for roughness, we want the eyes to be shiny and a little bit rougher on the rest of that. So I'm going to solidify my map. And I think to add some more interest and some variation in there, I'm going to take the head diffuse color here. I'm going to solidify that. We're going to flatten that image. I'm going to now look into these different channels, and I'm going to see if any of these have some sort of interesting aspects that kind of bring out some of those details. I think maybe this blue channel is the one that I want to use. So I'm going to grab that, bring that over here, and then this one now is going to be my roughness, my head roughness channel. So just to make sure that the eyes are as glossy and black as possible, I'm going to grab that and set my black point. We'll increase the contrast on that a little bit. And I think I'm also going to sort of over sharpen this, just to kind of bring out some of those extra sort of details in there, make it a little bit more obvious. I'm really going to crank that up, but I want to bring out some of these details in the roughness. So these areas that are white are going to be very sort of soft, and then these areas that are darker are going to be a little bit glossier. I'm going to save that as the roughness, PNG, head rough, apply that. Go back into Modo. So we can take that head roughness now and we can set that to an Unreal roughness. So we got glossy on the eyes, and then the head is a little more rough. So maybe that is controlled by this specular amount. So what if we can increase that? He starts to look a little bit too glossy. So I'm wondering if we duplicate that, set this one to Unreal Specular, and then we invert it. if we get more of a good look. So yeah, I think that's bringing out those details kind of the way that I want them to. So that is exactly what I'm going to do with the specular amount. So I'm going to delete that. Delete that. We're going to go into Photoshop and I'm going to take this roughness map that I made. We're going to clone those layers and invert that. I think Control M. I'm going to adjust the curves a little bit on that guy. Adjustment. Really want you up here. This one we're going to save as PNG, and this is going to be head spec amount. Add image map. I'm going to load image, get that head specular. Set that to Unreal Specular. So we don't have to deal with a metallic here because we don't have any metal in his head. If he was wearing an earring or had some other sort of stuff, maybe we'd need to be making a metallic map for this, but in his head case we don't need to do that. And I'm going to add in one last image here on the head. So we're going to add in that Ambient Occlusion. And I'm going to set that to Unreal Ambient Occlusion. I think that's looking pretty good. So I've gone through and I've shown you how to make adjustments to the armor, to the bodysuit, to the head. So let's do a quick pass here at the dome, which doesn't require any image map, so we can do that really quick. So I'm just going to quickly add in the Unreal material here. And then we need to set this to probably 100% specular. We're going to have the roughness is going to be really low, like maybe 3%, because we want this to be clear. And we're going to change the opacity down to maybe 4%. Makes it disappear a little too much. So maybe we'll tweak that some, but instead of looking like a sort of a tinted lens, we can adjust this color here on that. Of course, once you've got these things into the actual environments of your game, you're going to want to be doing more tweaking to these. In that case, you're going to be probably doing that in your game engine. So in this case, it would be Unreal. So we can only sort of kind of guess what it's going to look good. So always plan on doing additional look development or adjustments to your stuff once you actually get it into the real environments of your game. Alright, so we got the gloves, the belt, the wrist controls, the boots, knee pads, and his breathing tube. It's all just sort of metal and plastic, metal and plastic. So we're going to be doing the exact same processes that I've shown you already on the other pieces. So you don't want to sit here and watch me do this over and over again. So I think right here I'm going to stop the look dev, and then we come back. We will finish prepping our object for export into Unreal.